The old man didn't resist. He stood on the sunlit sidewalk, his weathered hands raised slowly in surrender, as if his bones still remembered the weight of war. His army jacket, faded and clean, fluttered slightly in the breeze, the words Vietnam veteran stitched across the back. Two officers shouted conflicting orders, one yelling, "Get on the ground," while the other barked, "Hands where we can see him." Within seconds he was shoved down. The sound of cuffs clicking echoed louder than the onlookers' gasps. A grocery bag spilled beside him, just apples, medication, and a VA appointment card. Welcome to Tailcraft, the place where truth walks like a man in worn boots, and the stories we tell don't just entertain, they challenge. Here we bring you stories that dig beneath the surface, stories where injustice meets resistance and dignity finds its voice. If this is your first time joining us, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, because real stories deserve to be heard. What would you have done if you saw an old black veteran on the ground, cuffed for no reason? Would you have spoken up, or stayed silent like most did that day? Today's story is one of shocking injustice, and unforgettable justice. It begins with the wrongful arrest of a calm, elderly black veteran humiliated by two local officers outside a convenience store. But just 30 minutes later, the unthinkable happens. Black SUVs screech to a halt outside the precinct. Men in suits and shades move in formation. The FBI storms the station. The same men who dragged him from the sidewalk would soon be standing frozen, trying to explain to federal agents why they put a decorated war hero in chains. But this isn't just about badges or uniforms. This story matters because it shows how racism isn't always loud. It can be quiet, procedural, and dressed in authority. It shows how even a man who risked his life for his country can be reduced to a suspicious figure just because of his skin color. Yet, it also shows how power can shift in a moment, and how those who are underestimated may have powerful allies you never see coming. Because justice, like truth, always finds a way. So stay with us. You're about to hear how one man's legacy, and the people who refused to forget it, turned a moment of disgrace into a national headline. You'll see what happened when someone finally said, "Enough." And by the end, you'll be asking the same question that lit the fire under this entire story: what kind of country arrests its heroes? This is Tailcraft, and this is a story that needs to be told. The morning started like any other. Mr. Elijah Brooks, 78 years old, laced up his boots and wore his old army jacket with quiet pride. He didn't dress for attention, he dressed for remembrance. Heading to the pharmacy to refill his heart medication, he took the same route he'd walked for over a decade. Along the way, he nodded to a few familiar faces, holding the same soft smile he had when he met President Carter back in '79. But on this day, what waited for him outside the store wasn't a neighbor or a friend. It was trouble in uniform. Parked across the store entrance were two local police officers in a cruiser. They were new in town, unfamiliar with faces, histories, or respect. One of them, Officer Randall, squinted through the window and whispered something to his partner. Moments later, they stepped out of the car, hands already on their belts. Elijah had just stepped out of the store with a small bag when he heard, "Sir, come here a second." He turned, calm and cooperative, and responded with a respectful, "Yes, officer?" But what followed had nothing to do with respect. It was suspicion draped in authority. "Do you have any weapons on you?" one officer barked, stepping closer. Elijah's confusion was evident. "Weapons? I'm just heading home, sir." The younger officer pointed at his jacket, mistaking his military medals as gang symbols. Elijah chuckled softly, thinking it was a misunderstanding. But when he reached into his pocket to pull out his VA card, one officer drew his gun. The veteran froze. "Put your hands where I can see him," they shouted. Within seconds, Elijah was forced to the ground. Knees on his back. Apples rolling across the sidewalk. The street watched in stunned silence. Someone began recording. A teenager nearby, shocked by what he was witnessing, pulled out his phone. Another woman screamed, "He's a veteran. He didn't do anything." But the officers didn't stop. "We got a call about a suspicious man casing the store," one muttered, trying to justify their actions. But the store clerk, who'd served Elijah personally just moments ago, came outside yelling, "He's a regular. That man served in Vietnam." Still, they cuffed him tightly, the metal cutting into his fragile wrists. Decades ago, those hands held wounded soldiers. Now they were bruised by the very nation he protected. By the time they got him into the back of the cruiser, the crowd had grown. The video was already circulating online. Some were crying. Others were shouting. But Elijah remained silent. Not out of fear, out of fatigue. This wasn't his first time being judged before being heard. As a black man in America and a soldier who returned home to racism after the war, he knew too well how quickly respect could vanish. The officers ignored the protests and drove off, leaving behind the store clerk holding Elijah's bag and shaking her head in disbelief. At the precinct, things didn't improve. The arresting officers chuckled as they wrote up a vague report, calling Elijah uncooperative and aggressive. He sat in a holding cell, eyes steady, posture firm. They didn't even offer him water. One officer mocked his medals through the glass. Another joked, "Must have served in the losing side." But Elijah didn't respond. Because deep inside he knew something was coming. He'd made a single call. Just one. Before they threw him in the back of the cruiser, he'd managed to press a number saved in his pocket flip phone. The number belonged to someone who owed him everything. That call didn't go unnoticed. And soon the tides would turn. Because while two racist officers felt powerful behind their badges, they had unknowingly laid hands on a man who once led special recon missions behind enemy lines, who saved lives, trained federal officers, and earned classified commendations. And though they couldn't see it, the gears of justice had already begun to spin. Somewhere across the city, black SUVs had already left the parking garage of a federal building. Unmarked cars. Dark suits. Cold faces. They weren't coming to ask questions. They were coming to make things right. The video hit social media like wildfire. It started with a teen's TikTok post titled, "They arrested a Vietnam vet for wearing medals?" And within minutes, it was picked up by Twitter, Facebook, and news feeds across the nation. In just 30 minutes, the footage of Elijah Brooks being slammed to the ground trended under the hashtag Justice for Elijah. People weren't just angry, they were heartbroken. The clarity of the video left no room for misinterpretation. An old man, clearly peaceful, being manhandled like a criminal. Veterans, influencers, and even local news anchors began reposting, asking the same question, "Who are these cops?" Across the city, inside the same pharmacy Elijah had visited, the cashier, Ghislaine, was still shaking. "He's a war hero," she told a local reporter who had rushed to the scene. "He comes in here every Tuesday. Brings me stories. Never once has he raised his voice." Her voice cracked as she held up the small plastic bag containing Elijah's pills and apples. Behind her, customers nodded solemnly. Another customer, retired Marine Sergeant Luis Ramos, stood outside the store recording a live stream. "I don't care what they say, those were medals. That man's a veteran, and they just humiliated him on our streets." Meanwhile, hundreds began commenting on Elijah's past. His niece uploaded a photo of him in uniform, flanked by medals and holding a folded flag. She wrote, "This is who they tackled. He fought for a country that still sees his skin before his service." Her words ignited emotions far and wide. Within an hour, celebrities and activists joined in. A retired general posted, "Elijah Brooks once saved my unit in Vietnam. I stand with him." Reporters started calling the precinct. But they got no answers, just silence. The officers who arrested him were already trying to downplay it as a procedural misunderstanding. But the public didn't buy it. Nor did the people who had witnessed the arrest firsthand. A mother of two, LaTanya Reynolds, posted her version of the story in a heartfelt Facebook video. "I saw that man offer the cops his ID. I saw them ignore his words and throw him down like a sack of trash. My kids were with me. How do I explain that to them?" Her video too went viral, reaching national outlets. News vans gathered at the corner where it all happened. Protesters showed up with signs chanting, "Honor the veteran. Fire the racists." Inside the precinct, the energy had shifted. Calls flooded in. Angry voicemails, reporters demanding interviews, and veterans groups threatening legal action. But it was one call, just one, that truly rattled the room. A deep, cold voice from the Department of Justice requested the names of every officer on duty during the arrest. Not asked. Demanded. Then came the chilling follow-up, "Secure the holding cell. He's no longer under your custody." That moment, the arresting officers exchanged glances. Suddenly, they realized this wasn't going to be swept under the rug. They had touched the wrong man. And now, powerful forces were watching. Back online, the world waited. Comments poured in every second. People weren't just outraged, they were ready to act. A petition demanding the officer's immediate suspension hit over 100,000 signatures in an hour. A GoFundMe campaign to support Elijah's legal defense surpassed $50,000 before he even knew it existed. Elijah's face, stoic and scarred, became the symbol of dignity under fire. But behind the scenes, justice wasn't being written with hashtags. It was rolling silently through the streets in the form of black vehicles and federal agents with files already in hand. The city had seen injustice, but now it was about to witness accountability. The fluorescent lights inside the precinct flickered, casting long shadows across the chipped floor tiles. Officers went about their usual routines, filling out paperwork, sipping stale coffee, when the buzz of radios cut through the air. Dispatch went quiet. Then came a knock. Not on the front desk. On the private side entrance used only by senior officials. A young officer opened it and froze. Standing there were 3 agents in navy jackets with gold FBI lettering. Behind them, 2 black SUVs still idled, their engines humming. "We're here for Elijah Brooks," the lead agent said. "And for the officers responsible for his arrest." The room fell silent. Sergeant Klein, the officer who'd led Elijah's takedown, looked up from his desk, suddenly pale. "There must be some mistake," he stammered. But Agent Marquez, the one who had spoken, didn't blink. "No mistake," he said, pulling a warrant from a leather folder. "You unlawfully detained a decorated Vietnam veteran, caused bodily harm, and violated federal civil rights protections under Title 18, Section 242. You're coming with us." Murmurs spread across the precinct. Some officers stood, others looked away. Nobody moved to stop the agents. The illusion of immunity had finally shattered. Meanwhile, Elijah Brooks sat in a holding cell, legs crossed, eyes fixed on a single crack in the wall. He hadn't said a word since the arrest. But when he heard the sharp clack of boots outside his door, he stood. The door swung open. "Mr. Brooks," Agent Marquez said, his tone softened, "you're free to go. You're no longer in local custody. We're here to take you home." Elijah didn't react at first. Then he gave a small, tired smile. "'Bout time," he whispered. As he stepped out, he didn't look back at the cell. He didn't have to. Outside the precinct, the scene was surreal. Crowds had gathered, cell phones in hand, as word had spread online that the FBI was making arrests. Elijah emerged flanked by federal agents, his posture straight, his eyes calm. When the crowd saw him, a spontaneous cheer erupted. Someone handed him an American flag. Someone else knelt and saluted. He nodded respectfully but said nothing. The cameras captured the moment. A silent man in a flannel coat, walking free, while officers who had tried to silence him were now handcuffed behind the same walls they once commanded. It was poetic. And the whole nation was watching. Inside, Agent Marquez turned to Sergeant Klein. "You've been warned before," he said. "About profiling. About unnecessary force." Klein scowled, his ego still clinging to denial. "You're making a mistake. This'll blow over. You'll see." Marquez raised an eyebrow. "No, Sergeant. You made the mistake. And now you'll see how it ends." As he spoke, FBI techs began downloading surveillance footage, collecting internal reports, and interviewing witnesses inside the station. This wasn't just about Elijah anymore. This was a full-scale investigation into systemic abuse. Every officer who had laughed, ignored, or enabled would now have to explain themselves, under oath. Back at Elijah's home, his niece wiped away tears as her uncle stepped inside. "Uncle Eli," she cried, rushing into his arms. "They told me you were arrested. We thought you were gone." He hugged her back gently, then sat down at his old wooden chair by the fireplace. "They forgot who I was," he murmured, looking at the dusty photo of him in uniform on the mantel. "But someone reminded them." His niece nodded. "The world saw, Uncle. You weren't alone." For the first time in hours, Elijah exhaled deeply. The weight began to lift, but justice still had work to do. By evening, the media had taken over. News anchors on every channel reported the dramatic turnaround. In a stunning move today, federal agents entered a local police station and arrested multiple officers involved in the illegal detention of Vietnam veteran Elijah Brooks, one anchor said. Sources confirmed the DOJ is now investigating broader misconduct within the department. Military leaders and politicians began issuing statements. A U.S. senator even called Elijah personally to apologize. But Elijah, ever humble, declined to speak publicly. "This ain't about me," he told a reporter waiting outside. "It's about making sure it never happens to the next old soldier." Still, his story became more than a headline. Schools began using the video to teach about civil rights. Churches prayed in his name. Veterans across the country reached out, sharing their own experiences of discrimination and silence. The ripples of what happened in that small town stretched across state lines, inspiring protests, new policies, and internal reviews in precincts far beyond. Elijah Brooks had gone to the pharmacy to buy apples and medicine, but he returned with the nation's conscience in his hand. And while the officers who wronged him faced charges, he simply sat on his porch, watching the sun rise like any other day. The atmosphere in the station changed permanently after that day. The silence that had once followed every unjust order was shattered, replaced by whispers of accountability and wary glances toward every badge. Harold, despite everything, didn't demand revenge. Instead, he asked that the officers undergo federal training in civil rights law. That was the kind of man he was, a warrior for justice, not destruction. He told reporters, "You don't fight ignorance with hate, you fight it with education and truth." His words went viral, sparking national conversations on how elderly veterans, especially black heroes, are still fighting wars at home. News outlets picked up Harold's story. They called him the soldier who silenced the department, and the veteran who taught the FBI a lesson in humility. But Harold never sought fame. He just wanted to make sure no one's grandfather, no quiet old man walking home from church, would ever be cuffed and mocked again. His story inspired legislation in his city, mandatory cultural sensitivity and racial bias training for all law enforcement officers. It wasn't just a headline, it was change. A man wronged had turned his pain into a powerful tool for justice. As Harold stood outside the now empty station months later, watching as the new staff moved in under fresh leadership, a young officer approached him. She looked nervous but determined. "Mr. Hensley," she said, "your story made me want to become a better cop." "Thank you." Harold smiled, nodded, and offered a firm handshake. Sometimes the loudest revolutions come from quiet dignity. Sometimes the bravest men don't yell, they simply stand even after being knocked down. That's what Harold did. Not just for himself, but for every soul that ever felt invisible, disrespected, or forgotten. And if you're hearing this story for the first time, I want to ask you, what would you have done if you were Harold? Or if you had witnessed it? These questions aren't just part of the tale, they're part of your call to action. So, if this story touched you, challenged you, or gave you hope, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Talecraft, where stories speak louder than headlines. And don't forget to drop a comment below. What do you think justice looks like today? Let's keep this conversation alive.